Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the High Dragon's Breath Bow Wow, welcoming you back to another Archon's Armies, talking this time about Titans, specifically Imperial and Chaos Titans. Without further ado, let's get into this double upload. Starting off with the Mythos. Titan armies are rare? How rare exactly is the real myth here? In comparison to knights, which are bound to their homeworlds, or at least have some services there, and that they often return to, knights are bound to forges. And only the best of forges keep... Titans are bound to forges, and only the best of forges keep legios of Titans around. It is an understatement to say that armies of Titans, aka entire legions going to war, is rare. Beyond rare. The only time at which a Titan walks is when a forge's direct survival or viability is threatened. Or when a forge essentially wants to put their loyalty to the Imperium or their service to the Imperium beyond all and any amount of doubt. That means that there are basically two scenarios in which a Titan army will be deployed. One, in support of an entire Imperial crusade, or two, when a forge is directly under threat, and they are either being invaded, or a planet very close to them that they rely upon, or that could weaken their defensive ring, is also being invaded. So, Titan armies are small and tactical. Well, kind of and kind of not. A demi-legio can range anywhere between one true capital-sized Titan and a couple of helpers to half an actual legio, which could include multiple warlord Titans or anything of that size, and several different types of reavers and maybe a dozen or more warhounds. It could be anything between that large size and the much smaller, more quote-unquote tactical form of one reaver and two warhounds. That is technically a demi-legion that could be deployed if a legio were very depleted or spread out along a large front line, which is common during a crusade. Finally, or second to last, Titans are only used or useful against other Titans. Kind of true, kind of not true. Titans work best when they are fighting against other large vehicles, for a lot of reasons. On the one hand, firing at standard infantry is just a waste of time for a majority of Titans, no matter how numerous they are. Thousands of Tyranids, if they are not equipped with super heavy armor-piercing weapons, which none of them are, that's not going to damage or threaten a warlord or a reaver Titan all that much. He would essentially stomp them to death without much qualms about it, and save his weapons for the warrior beast or for the dangerous enemy combatants who he's going to have to deal with personally. They have a very contemptuous way about their conflict, where they look at anything below them as squishies, crunchies, steppable objects, so to speak, and they do not consider them worthy of note, of notice. They don't care. But that does mean that there are things that the Titans do care about. Super heavy enemy assets, large numbers of heavy enemy assets. I often see it said that firing at Lehman Russ tanks is a waste of time. I disagree. Individual tanks, a Titan probably won't bother with. It will let its escorts deal with, or its scout Titans deal with. But columns of enemy armored vehicles, 20 or 50 or 60 of them, yeah, the Titan's gonna care, not only because that could theoretically be a threat to its continued combat operations, it's a threat to his escorts, and he can deal with it with a relatively easy amount of conflict, as opposed to his allies might have a very large battle on their hands. For a Titan, a regiment of Imperial Guard armor is brunch. It's a little bit easier, or it's a little bit harder than breakfast, but not quite so hard as the true lunch that something like a super heavy vehicle or a knight would be. Finally, it takes a Titan to take down a Titan. Demonstrably untrue. Don't know if there's anyone still spouting this one, but I know that when I first came to the hobby, there were people saying that, oh yeah, you need Titans to deal with Titans, and that's because it was a common phrase coined by the Mechanicus. This is bullshit. Plenty of things can kill Titans. Bane blades can kill Titans. Super heavy armored vehicles can kill Titans. Lots of artillery can kill or wound Titans. The other thing is, you don't necessarily have to take down the Titan to make it no longer a threat. Getting it to retreat counts as a victory. So, this idea that the Mechanicus did put forward, and I think it's a thing that they still say in some of the books, which I just find inane. I think it might just be a thing of covering up their own face and being like, no, we're not deploying Titans right now. There aren't any Titans on the battlefield. We don't want to do it, la 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 la. But I think it also might be a thing of, well, to demonstrably kill an enemy god machine, the Titans want to do it. That's their target. Their target after the Horus Heresy was kill the traitor Legion Titans who betrayed us during the Horus Heresy. It's this vengeful activity when it's Titan against Titan. That's not necessarily true in modern 40k, just because plenty of Titans have come and gone past that period, especially the smaller Scout Titans. They're not going to have that much of a history necessarily. They're not remade every day, but, Ship of Theseus them together enough times, and they will probably be a lot different, not to mention that the pilots are going to be different, all that kind of stuff. The power of the Machine Spirit is very strong within the Titan, but not all Titans are, made the same, and definitely not all Titans are from the Age of the Heresy. Plenty of them are, but not all of them. Reality of Titan armies. Sorry, I didn't even finish my thought there. That's the reason why the Mechanicus say it takes a Titan to take down a Titan. They want to deploy their Titans against only enemy Titans because that's what the Titans want to do, that's what they want to do, it earns the most prestige, etc. Nobody else can really deal with them easily. Reality of Titan armies. Love the pictures here. I'm not going to be explaining them all that too much. We kind of got Imperator here, Warlord modification here. You can see the comparison to armored vehicles, tanks. That might also be an Imperator, but yeah, either way. You can see the comparison to other tanks, standard infantry. They kind of just dwarf everything on the battlefield. And then we have this absolutely enormous, I forget exactly what type of vehicle it is, but it is a Shrine to Mork and Gork. That's all that matters. Orcs for the win. Origins. These are forged, maintained equalizers. What is an equalizer? Nothing can stand against the Titan and easily win. It is a struggle. No matter who you are, what you're equipped with, or what your armament is, a Titan is not an easy target, and it is not one that can be taken out with any amount of ease. It is the great equalizer. If you have one force that is dramatically outnumbered and horribly outgunned, drop a Titan onto the field and all of a sudden they somehow have the advantage. Maybe because they have a Titan with them. But yes, I put them as the great equalizers. They come out of forges. Most of the legios or demi-legios are organized around or with the assistance of a specific forge. So the Adeptus Mechanicus maintain them. They decide on a lot of the crewing. The crewing for the actual big Titans takes many, many, many people. And a lot of support and maintenance equipment is needed just to keep these things running. Equipment, the greatest and the most venerable, supported by the Mechanicus and by other forces. So, you have the IG helping out with the Titans, you have the Mechanicus always sending little explorator fleets to help out the Titans, or straight-up Mechanicus armies, these deployment forces that we talked about in the Mechanicus armies video. But the weapons of the Titan are not like the Knight. They're not something that gets chopped off and replaced all that easily. Often the weapons themselves are holy and beyond sacrosanct and blessed relics in their own account, especially with the bigger Titans. With the Warhounds and with the Reavers, maybe you can do a little bit of monkeying around if you're not on the Chaos side of things, but oh my god, changing out an Imperator's Titan's weapon might be outright impossible. It might be literally too big to change out, and what would you change it out for? It's not as if these things had dozens of extra weapons made for them. During the Heresy and before, maybe, but during the 41st Millennium, no. A lot of those extra backups that were in storage are going to be used as the basis for the next Titan of that class, so the day has come and gone when Titans had dozens of backup weapons to choose from. You kind of got to deal with what you got. On the other hand, almost everything that you got is pretty damn good. Not a single Titan weapon is worse than even the best of Knight weapons, in my opinion. The worst Titan weapon is still attached to a Titan, which as a fighting platform is better than any Knight in existence, period, end of story. By a long shot. Both in its armor protection, its electrical systems, its mobility, given its size, and usually in its weaponry, secondaries, and the skill of its crew. Vast majority of the time. So, stages of Titan deployment. A lot of people asked about this, and I would really like to get into it now because nobody talks about this. The first one is a Titan detachment is assembled. How do you assemble a Titan detachment, and why the hell is that the first step? It is essentially saying, okay, we have this many machines ready for combat right now. You know, we have 3 Warhounds, 2 Reavers, a Warlord ready for combat right now. That's a Demi-Legio. That's the detachment. But maybe the conflict zone doesn't require all of those. Maybe it requires 1 Warlord and 2 Warhounds to essentially run as his guards/scouts. That's a detachment. That is not the entire Demi-Legio or Legio, but it is what we have available, ready to deploy, and what we think that the situation requires. So that detachment is formed while the Titans are still on the Forge world. And they split them up and they go, okay, there's a conflict, one system over, we think they might ask us to help with that. This Titan, and this Titan. You guys, you're now a unit, you're a detachment. If we get called upon and we're forced to help, you guys are first in the pan, get ready to go. It's kind of like when you get SEAL Team 6 boys out to do a mission. It's like, alright, you're on deck, you don't know where you're going or what you're doing, all you know is that you must kill. So that's the detachment phase. Then there's the request. The request is always made. The Mechanicus will very rarely go out of their way to deploy the God Machines. Both because they act as one of the major defensive assets of the Forge. They are some of the most important war machines available to the Forge. Beyond anything super special, like Dark Age of Technology walkers or things like that. The Titans are going to be second only to those things that cannot ever be made again. So this request will have to come from the Imperium. The Administratum or the Munitorum or Militarum will essentially come together, gather a dossier of reasons, give it to the officer in charge of the Astra Militarum's deployments, and then that dude will look over it, deem it okay, and then send it on via the Administratum to the Mechanicus. The Mechanicus will then unpack all these reasons, all these details, all the things that the Guard have tried to entice them with. They'll show them like, ooh, here's a picture of a Titan. Here's a picture of our forces after they got obliterated by an enemy Titan. Here's a bunch of Chaos Knights. Here's a bunch of enemy, cursed heretical stuff that they're doing to your technology. They will intentionally try and inflame the passions of the tech priests that don't exist, but they'll do their best, to try and get them to let the Titans off the leash. Because the Guard wants Titans. It's an overwhelming advantage that almost no one can stand against. So, that's the request. Then comes the longest phase of deployment, theoretically, other than the long haul. Politics. The politics of a Titan deployment are horrendously frustrating. The Mechanicus want something in exchange. If you can't guarantee that there are enemy Titans there, if you're kind of bullshitting around it and trying to tell them, like, there might be Titans there, we've seen a lot of constructs moving around, and there's lots of armor here, they're going to be like, nah. You confirm that there are Titans there, or we ain't selling. Or, on the other side, the Guard might be like, okay, maybe there's not Titans, but, if you do this, and they, like, wink at the Administratum, if you do this, maybe you don't have to pay taxes for the next 10 years. How does that sound? And then the Forge will kind of stroke his chin and go, 12 years. 11 years? Shake hands, hand to Mechadendrite, deal. Politics done. Shortest possible political situation ever, but you can see what I mean. This back and forth politicking on what do the Mechanicus get out of this for risking their necks and their God Machines, what do the Guard have in terms of proof that there is a need for those Titans. They will go back and forth with this until the Mechanicus either caves, or they just say, nope, we refuse, and then it goes to the Administratum, and the Administratum will start a tax war, a tithing war, confusion. They'll start messing around with the Mechanicus, essentially trying to cage and box them in to bring them back to the negotiating table. Or they will offer them big things like, alright, we will give you free supplies from this world for the rest of all eternity. And then the mechanics will be like, new fief world, take. And then they will be like, alright, Titans, it's like you sold one of your kids, and you're like, alright, you go on with this guy, I'm gonna count my $100 bills. And they will send out the Titans, and they will take something in return. Landfall. This is the most interesting thing. Unlike Knights, which can deploy via drop pod, but generally will deploy via landing ship, landfall for Titans is almost always a landing ship operation. That means that a certain area of land needs to be cleared, doesn't matter where, and then a whole freighter or heavy freighter will drop out of orbit that is Mechanicus owned and controlled. Obviously, as mentioned in the Mechanicus videos, they will escort Titans with their own warships and their own, some of their logistic ships that they've essentially taken from the Administratum, filled with their own supplies and troops, and then shipped out with the Titans in them. Those ships will drop down to the surface, literally break orbit, land, drop onto the ground, open up their massive cargo bays, and then the Titans will walk out and make landfall. The Adeptus Mechanicus do not want to do this under fire. They do not want to have to drop ramp and let their Titans come out right into a battle. No way would they let that happen. Not only is there a danger of the ship getting damaged, and since it has a lot of the logistical support for the Titans, they really don't want to do that, but there's also the chance that it crashes if it gets hit by, like, surprise orbital artillery or something. So they will want guarantees from the Guard that orbital artillery has been taken care of, or that it's distracted. You know, the Guard will troll a couple of Imperial Navy ships above a hive, just to make sure that the orbital weapons are damn well focused on keeping themselves alive, rather than firing at the Titan-carrying ships. And then once those ships land and get down, the Titans will get out, and they can effectively run to wherever they're needed on the battlefield. So, initial deployment. This is the first hit that the opponent gets that there are Titans. This is not a subtle maneuver. This is not a subtle attack. Titans are the furthest thing from subtle in possibly the entirety of the 41st millennium. Next to demons, Titans are the second least subtle. They are horribly unsubtle. And the initial deployment will essentially be, oh, uh-oh. It is a moment of existential dread as you realize that you're not winning this one. I find it so interesting that, you know, forces of chaos or sedition or Xenos might be fighting out for years, and then all of a sudden it's like, why that mountain moving? It's like, oh no, we've made enough of a ruckus that some Forge World nearby decided that it was a good time to send in the Titans. You know, maybe you knew they were coming. For example, on the Siege of Rax, they dropped down one of their Chaos Legios just in time to catch an entire Baneblade regiment by surprise and decimate like a ton of them. You know, it's not an even fight. It's multiple Reaver Titans plus Warhounds, plus maybe one Warlord, if I remember right, against 20 Baneblades. So, not an even fight by any means, but Shadow Swords are in the van, and they help out with that. But that's the Chaos side. This is the Imperial side. Their initial deployment will be a shock deployment. It will be introducing these enemies of the Imperium to Titan Shock. Titan Shock is something that happens like Tank Shock, where an enemy force realizes that, man, my lasgun really doesn't matter anymore. I'm looking at a god machine that is 150 meters high in the air, and it's not even noticing me as it's literally stepping on sections of our line and crushing my friend to death. Not to mention that all of our artillery and special weapons and heavy weapons are literally bouncing off of it where they even come close to it whatsoever. So, Titan Shock is literally like instantaneous PTSD at times. There's a description from the Sabbat Worlds Crusade where Titanic demon engines, woe machines, specifically from Herod or Asphodel, are fighting against Imperial Reaver Titans, and the sound and visible damage to both vehicles give the guardsmen around them instantaneous PTSD. They go mad, they go insane, they start losing their minds, killing themselves, shooting friendlies, just absolutely losing it. There's terror in their eyes. They're rolling. They're going back to animal instinct. Because the shock, the sound, the war horns that could blow your eardrums out, the weapons that could blast small orbital ships into pieces, this horror, this literal man-made horrors beyond man's conception has brought them down to the level of the animal at which the Titan sees them, so to speak. So that is the initial deployment. It is the deployment of Titan Shock in its purest and most distilled variant. And then finally, the longest one other than the politics phase, the long haul. Titans have a complicated deployment doctrine on the battlefield. They come with a long logistical train, they have high maintenance requirements, they have high ammunition requirements, they are very mobile, but they're not all that quick. So they can move quite a bit, they could go long distances, they can keep up with infantry and with vehicles, but they are not nimble, especially the very large ones. Warhounds are really the only ones that are relatively nimble. Reavers could probably keep up with knights, but Warhounds can run with armigers, essentially. They are a little bit slower, just because of their sheer size. They have limitations in what terrain they can run on, but once they get to running, they can pace with armigers pretty easily. So this long haul is a lot of transporting Titans around the field, hitting any targets, and most specifically, going for the things that the Imperial Guard promised would be here. We are going to try and draw out the enemy Titans, we're going to try and draw out the enemy God Machines or the enemy heavy armor, and destroy them. So that's the whole goal, and that's the main point of the long haul. We will stick around until all of the assets in theater that were worth killing have been killed, and then we're going to screw off, back into the stars, back to the homeworld to get resupplied and repaired. The good, the bad, and the ugly. So this is Chaos versus Imperial versus Xenos. The best Titan legions, the best Legios, the best Demi-Legios, the best support troops are Imperial, without question. The Imperial Legios and Demi-Legios are large, they are comprehensive, they are well-equipped, they are well-supported, and they basically have armies of their own sitting around their feet ready to prep for them. Whether they are Imperial Guard regiments in totality that have been deployed in conjunction with the Titans, or they are Mechanicus forces who have been deployed to protect them as part of the Mechanicus Explorer Army, or the Group Army, or Deployment Army, or even, any number of support assets like Baneblades, or even other Knights. It's often seen that Knights will support Titans, sometimes, so those are going to be the best. The bad side is going to be Chaos. Chaos has worse maintenance and storage issues than the Imperium does, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But the main thing with Chaos is their God Machines are generally a lot more heavily afflicted with Chaos Taint than even their Knights tend to be. This is both because they are storied, they are more ancient, they have more recognition from the gods. So you'll notice that a lot of Titan designations that are specifically Chaos, they are not particularly logical. They are infested with demons, they are filled with illogical stuff, they don't really have the laws of physics necessarily apply to them, some of them are outright impossible, like Atrocitus, which does not work in real life, but works in the warp. But yeah, that's the bad side of it. There are other things to the Chaos Titans, we'll talk about that later. But finally, the ugly. And I hate to throw this in here, but Xenos. Xenos Titan equivalent weapons and equipment, I may talk about it in another video when I do all Xenos stuff, but they're nowhere near Imperial Titan level. They never will be. There is essentially not a single non-Imperial Titan that can stand toe-to-toe with its equal in the Imperial line and have a very high chance of winning. The Hierophant, no. The Hierophant gets crushed. The Orcish war machines not only require a very, very high-level WA in order to maintain, God's-Ghoul, for example, or the other sieges of Armageddon, but they are not all that well protected in comparison to a knight, and they're not usually as well armed in terms of anti-armor weaponry. Eldar, the Wraithwalkers are cool, guys. They do not stand up to a Titan nearly as well as they stand up to a knight. I'm sorry, but they would get absolutely obliterated by even the lightest version of Imperial Titans. It's possible for them to get around it. Maybe. But I think a Warhound and a Wraith Knight, the Warhound has a very, very, very good advantage over you, and I would not want to be in that Wraith Knight, or, possessing that Wraith Knight, as it were. The only other faction that I could think of other than Tyranids, Orcs, and Eldar, the Tau. I'm sorry, Tau guys, I just did your army videos. You know that none of your stuff can stand up to a Titan, right? I don't want to be rude here, and I'm definitely not an Imperial simp. I'm a Chaos guy, but there's not a single Tau vehicle that would last a bare second against a true Titan. Knights, yes, that's a more fair fight. I think stick to your weight class there. But, oh my god. A Warhound against the largest Tau battlesuit would be a mercy kill. It would be brutal. It would be brutal. Because your largest and most powerful battlesuits struggle against Baneblades. And a Warhound could pretty easily overcome a Baneblade with only a small amount of danger to itself. Again, it's not an impossible fight for the Baneblade to win. Same way it's not an impossible fight for something like the Tau-Nar or the Riptide to win, but oh my god, are you at the worst disadvantage. You are way worse off than a Baneblade. Mostly because you're way worse armored. So, Imperial maintenance and storage. Generally, the maintenance is done on Forge World, so it's a long, complicated process, much like creating more Titans is a long, complicated process that takes decades, if not centuries, if not multiple centuries in order to achieve, but it is a process that can be done. Unlike a lot of other stuff which the Mechanicus just can't do anymore, Titans, they can do it, it's just really hard, and only certain Forge Worlds can do it. So, Chaos maintenance, oh boy, it's slapdash and messy. That's what I'm going to tell you. Chaos forces rely upon very specific technical people in order to get vehicles and equipment ready for battle. This means that there's a limitation in what those people can do, both in their capabilities, their materials, their skill, their time, their everything. Titans are generally above what they can manage. The only ones who I would say can maintain a Legio are very large worlds that have Dark Mechanicus influence, or who are owned by the Dark Mechanicus, or the Iron Warriors. The Iron Warriors do have their own Legio kind of sworn to them, or assisting them. Some other Chaos Legions do have Knights associated with them, but the ones that are associated with Chaos Legions tend to be the ones that are no longer operating on logical terms. So, for example, the Sound Boys, the Sound Titan Legion that works for Fulgrim and the Ecstatic Legion, the Host, the Emperor's Children, those folks don't need weapons, fuel, ammunition. They don't need it anymore. They are possessed with so many demons, and they are so bereft of anything non-chaotic. They are closer to a possessed demonic entity than a vehicle anymore, and a majority of them do not require the same level or type of maintenance that an Imperial or a regular Chaos Titan would. So, pros and cons. I'm not going to do all the images here. Love this picture. Man, it's from the front of the Horus Heresy books, and I like it a lot. Gives you a very good idea of the size comparison. You can see the Imperator Titan, the Warhound kind of coming up to its knee, the Reaver being way in the background but still being 3 times the size of an Imperial Knight, the Warlord being even taller than that further in the background, and then what looks like another Warlord back here. Still, very, very cool image. I like it a lot. I like the comparison between the Warlord Titan and an Imperial Hive. It reaches up almost halfway up the Hive's walls. Like it a lot. So, pros and cons. Organization, big pro. These are very small units using a lot of different assistive methods in order to keep themselves well organized, which means that basically they don't have any of the breakdown in communications or organization. One of the big issues is that Chaos Titans can sometimes have an issue with them being infected or influenced by Chaos, which can cause them to be a little bit less organized than their Imperial cousins, but on the other hand, sometimes there's just a greater demon in there, and he wants exactly the same thing that you want. Kill. So, sometimes the organization doesn't matter. Numbers. Big con. Legions are basically unheard of. You will see demi-legios on occasion, but the only time you'll see legion is when there's Imperial Crusades going on, or if you've invaded a Forge world so stupidly as to think that they didn't have Titans on hand. So, numbers, big con, always a limited number. There will be no replacement. That's the big thing. You knock out a Titan, there ain't going to be another one. You're not going to get, oh, we got one out of the factory. No, none of that bullshit's happening. It takes decades, if not centuries, to make a new Titan. And even if they had one halfway on the way when you killed the first one, you could probably circumnavigate the planet 100 times before they actually get it ready to fight you. So, numbers, definitely a con. Training, big pro. You are, I think genuinely, if you are a Princeps using the Titan, using its complicated full-body immortal MIU unit, where it basically is domination against domination, fighting for control of this creature that wants to make you think it's it and it thinks it's you, the Machine Spirit is so powerful that you need so much training. You need to be so strong of will, strong of mind, of body, of spirit. You might be one of the best trained people in the Imperium in terms of self-discipline and focus. Especially because you will serve for life. You are not getting out. You are not escaping. You cannot get rid of this responsibility. Once you are in something like an Imperator-class Titan, you're not getting back out again. Maybe if it's a Warhound. If it's a Warhound, maybe a Reaver, you can pop back out and have a little bit more mobility. But you get agoraphobia from not being inside of these things. You literally feel like, I really wish I was in my Titan right now because I feel uncomfortable being out in the open. They get agoraphobia. They feel uncomfortable without it. So a lot of them just choose to hook up with the Titan permanently, get themselves installed like a ship captain might with his throne, and just be like, nope, this is my life now. I am now a Titan. That's all I am. The human comes second, but I need to keep myself centered and know that I'm not losing myself to the machine. Very interesting concept. I'll go into it at a later date. Limited design, redesign, and units. So, Titans as a whole really only have 4 classifications, which is a big limitation. I'd put that as a massive con. Also, modifying and adjusting the design if you're not Chaos, oh my god, it's a massive pain in the ass. Not only does the Mechanicus not want to do it just out of the whole mechanical technology is sacred, and this is arcane mechanical technology, so double sacred, so no, you are not allowed to touchy, but there might be literal limitations. You might not have a weapon that can fit your Warlord Titan other than the one that it's currently equipped with. Some of the Carapace weapons might be swap-outable, but unless you're Chaos and have access to the Dark Mechanicus, yeah, you're not going to be redesigning it all that well yourself, and certainly not, like, in a short amount of time. Force mass, deployment, and flexibility. This is one of the major cons of a Titan force. While they are big in one area, they can't be everywhere at once, which means that they can be bypassed, gone around. There are ways to avoid them, and while their deployment is kind of limiting them to a fixed area in which they can operate, they can theoretically adjust that, but the big issue is flexibility. Titans do one thing. You're not going to see them do a lot of things that aren't kill other Titans or destroy large enemy fortifications. Like I said, they might deal with enemy armor if it's a particularly large enemy threat, but look at the Imperator Titan and tell me it's going to be dealing with a bunch of infantry. It's not going to be. So, even if there's a job that it might have to do, it might not necessarily be custom made for it, not to mention that a lot of them only have weapons that work against certain targets. You know, lots of small infantry units, something like a Warlord that only has anti-armor laser weapons, well, it might be shit out of luck. It's one of the reasons why the Imperator, being so big, actually has so many secondary weapons that it basically has an artillery, nest on its back. So, variety of units and assets. This is a big plus. While all Titans may look the same, they all serve very, very, very different purposes. And weirdly enough, only one of them is an all-rounder, and I'll tell you, it's not the Reaver. Nor is it the Warlord. So they have a variety of force levels, and they have a variety of assets that they can bring to bear. Most of them work in a ton of different situations. Maintenance is one of the massive cons for Titans. It is so difficult to put these things back together once they get broken or damaged. And, oh my god, training up new Princeps and getting ammo for all their stuff. Oh, it's a drag. It's a drag, and it's expensive. There's another reason why the Mechanicus don't want to deploy these guys willy-nilly. It's going to take me like 5 years just to get the ammo back into it, not to mention all the damage it's going to take from deploying against enemy Titans. So, yeah, maintenance, massive negative. It's a problem. It has to be done on a Forge World, is the other thing. Like, you're not going to be making Titan-grade ammunition a majority of the time on your average industrial planet. It requires a Forge's specific, hyper-specialized tech priests to make the required stuff for the Titans. So, last one. Force projection. This is not necessarily a pro or con. It goes into the next one. Force projection, that's the main goal of the army. So let's go into formations and unit types. Also a nice size comparison here. I'm not going to go into specific numbers here because I think it's completely ridiculous to try and put numbers to these. I think this one is probably the best in terms of specific numbers. And I think the scale here is pretty solid. But in general, it goes like this. The Warhound is knee-high or upper thigh-high to the Reaver. The Reaver is roughly thigh-high to the Warlord. The Warlord is hip-high to the Imperator Titan. And you can see that here as well. You can see Questoris Knight is thigh-high to the Warhound. Warhound is hip-high to the Reaver. Reaver is hip-high to the Warlord, maybe a little bit bigger. And then Warlord is hip-high to the Imperator. This is Dies Irae. It's got its top mountain cut off. I think it's a really cool thing. It's got this kind of brooding, crouching look, terrifying. And then the Imperator is twice the size of the Warhound, or of the Warlord, but half of that size is made up for by its cathedral. And this is a really great reference image if you want to see all these different types of things. Again, in comparison to tanks, the shin of the Warlord is taller than the Leman Russ. The shin of the Warhound is taller than the Leman Russ, which, that's terrifying. I would honestly be scared of one of these things stepping on me if I was a tanker nearby to one of them. Supporting units. These are the formations unit types. Sorry, I got distracted there by sizes. Supporting formations and unit types. Supporting units. This is the Guard, Admech, and Mechanicus. So, on one side, the Titans never deploy alone. They will always have infantry support. Often they will have aircraft, artillery, infantry, armor, all of that support in a single area. Essentially, they will be going at it with every single branch of the Imperial military, ensuring that the Titans can do their job, and that no branch of any of the people in this engagement can be overcome by the enemy. The Admech do this more often than not. So even when the Guard aren't particularly interested in going after the same target as the Titans, for example, if the Titans are going out to fight other Titans and those Titans don't have infantry support, the Guard might be like, why waste my life? Hey, Admech, are you cool protecting the Titans on your own? Because there's not going to be a lot of enemy infantry with those enemy Titans, and our infantry is going to get absolutely obliterated by those enemy Titans? And the Admech will just be like, yeah, sure, we're better than you anyway, we may as well do it ourselves. So, they will often do it in place of the Guard, or with the assistance of the Guard. Warhounds, one of my absolute favorites. They are Scout Titans. I will go over this in the next thing in more detail, but the point of these is that the Warhound acts as a scout and kind of a trial by fire unit. All Titans are super heavily armored. So they all have, like, multiple foot thick ceramite, steel, and adamantium protection. They are super heavy armored, incredibly heavy, hundreds and hundreds of tons. I would argue thousands of tons in the case of the Imperator class, and maybe even well over 1,000 tons in the case of the Warlord. Yeah, definitely over 1,000 tons in the case of the Warlord. But the Warhound is probably a little bit more reasonable to say somewhere around 500 tons. Counting out things like the mouse being 188, let's say that it's 4 or 5 of those, maybe 3 or 4, so let's say 500 to 700 tons would be reasonable for a Warhound. A majority of that is armor. And these things are tanky. There is very little exposed area within these. There is some, and it is vulnerable, and it is larger than the average knight, so I'd say that those vulnerabilities are more exposed at a certain level, but the Warhound is quick in comparison to the others, and it's not as high off the ground, but it is a scout. It is not equipped with weapons that are beyond super heavy tanks. and it is relatively quick and fast, meant to jump around the enemy force and kill enemies that are sub-Titan level or duel with enemy scouts. Reavers. These are what I call the battle line of the Titan line. While a Warhound might have an even fight with some of the absolutely largest of overtooled knights or enemy constructs that aren't Titans in their own right, the Reaver is meant to contradict those enemies directly. It is meant to be the main battle line, the main contacting force of a Demi-Legio. And you might say, why not the Warlord? It's specifically because of how the Warlord is armed. The Warlord is not really armed or armored or designed for close combat with enemy vehicles or Titans. It is designed to kill them before ever they get a chance to get close to the Warlord. The Reaver, on the other hand, is much more multi-purpose. Similar to the Questoris Knight, it is going to be equipped with a heavy anti-armor weapon, an anti-infantry carapace weapon, and then a melee weapon. It's got all of these different options, and that's why I call it the Brawler Titan. It has more mobility than the Warlord. It has a little bit less speed than the Warhound, but it's got more armor and way heavier weaponry than the Warhound has, which means that it is much more of a threat to enemy Titans. So while Warhounds can deal with things like Knights, they can deal with things like standard super heavy vehicles that aren't up to the armor protection level of a Baneblade, it can deal with enemy scouts, the Reaver can more easily deal with Titan-grade enemy demon engines, it can deal with enemy Warhounds, it can crush enemy Knights with ease, it can deal with most heavy armor without much effort. And the Warlord, the next step up, much larger and much more heavily armed, especially with its carapace weapons, is a heavy support Titan. I don't think the Warlord is meant to go into close combat with anything. I don't think, honestly, that it's even supposed to see the target in any great detail before it just obliterates it. The Warlord is designed with 2 super heavy carapace weapons before even we get to its arm weapons. So really, these things, while they can carry melee weapons, are basically designed to destroy enemy Titan and below threats with their ranged weapons before they become a problem. So they will almost be sniping out enemy units and destroying enemy units, especially of the super heavy and titanic variety, in a way to protect and support the Reavers and Warhounds who are acting as the closer range battle line brawler or scout units. So they support. Imperator or Emperor class. This is the only all-rounder Titan. You know, the Reaver is very brawly, but it's got a lot of stuff that it can't fight up against. Obviously, the Reaver versus Warlord combat isn't impossible for the Reaver to win, but it's not easy. But the Imperator can deal with anything, is equipped to deal with anything, and it is essentially a walking fortress. This is the best protected ground vehicle in common use by any faction in the 41st millennium. Some people might say there are certain rolling fortresses or the moving Terran palace. Common use. And again, you could probably count the number of Imperator Titans still in existence on, I would argue, probably all of your friends' hands and toes plus your own. So I would say there's probably less than 100 Imperator Titans still kicking it out in the galaxy somewhere, and I'd argue a good number of those are actually in the warp, or currently being worked on, repaired, or in construction. So, up to half of those, basically. They have artillery to deal with infantry, they have anti-aircraft to deal with aircraft, they have super heavy weapons to deal with Titans, and they are armored beyond belief. Not to mention the most heavily shielded ground vehicles in the entirety of the setting of 40k. Very few things can kill an Imperator Titan. Very few. Very few. And they are walking fortresses because they are disturbingly mobile. They can walk over mountains. They can walk within hives, essentially strutting down the main promenade of the hive. They just turn down a side street and glass the entire thing. They act like a support orbital weapon, in effect. And they are terrifying. I love them, but they are terrifying. Size question. So this might be another video, but again, these are good references for the size. One is just going to be hip high or shin high or thigh high to the other, and it goes up from dreadnoughts to knights to warhounds, reavers, warlords, and imperator. Moving on. Specific things. I was not specific enough, apparently. So, warhounds. Very interesting thing with these, they tend to be the most numerous in the Demi-Legio. They're equipped with very specific weapons that can deal with a lot of infantry. They can kind of obliterate stuff like Chaos Space Marines, possessed, mutants, all that kind of stuff. They deal with a lot of, like, flare-up enemy infantry, but they are also really, really disturbingly fast. I can't even tell you. Lupus Lux, during the battles for Urdesh, is fighting against a Plasmapult, and it is able to dodge, literally, like, jump itself out of the way of a plasma ball the size of its head coming right past it. And these things are disturbingly mobile. They are not as mobile as knights, but just barely. And they can keep up in a dead run on flat ground with an armiger. Again, they probably couldn't maintain a full sprint like an armiger could, but they can run pretty terrifyingly, and with a disturbing amount of speed, and they can decimate heavy armor units. So, something like a column of Leman Russ tanks, they could threaten a Warhound for sure, but they would need heavy armor-piercing weapons to actually penetrate it, not to mention getting through the 2 void shields that it actually has. So, quite difficult to kill one of these things. Reavers are the next step up. Heavily armored, only a few weak spots. They are less tall than the Warlord, and they're less well-armed, but they are essentially the Questoris Knight of the Titan Legions. So, they will often be the battle line unit. They have support weapons, usually rockets. They will have a heavy anti-armor weapon, whether it's their melee weapon or their ranged weapon. And then they will have an anti-heavy infantry, but really with their weapons at this size, it is an anti-vehicle weapon that just happens to look like an anti-infantry weapon. But a majority of the time, like the Warhounds, they can kind of just squish normal infantry threats. But yeah, they're the most Jimmy on the spot kind of Swiss Army knife unit. Then we go over here to the Warlord. The Warlord, just look for a second at the size comparison between a regular human and a Warlord Titan. That's not even the Imperator here, which you can see its shin is taller than a Questoris Knight. Now, its ankle is taller than a Questoris Knight almost. Kind of its shin. Its shin is taller than a Questoris Knight. And the humans barely even come up to being the height of one of its flattened toes. The Warlord is, like I said, that long-range support unit. It's going to have all ranged weapons, or mostly ranged weapons, and then one melee weapon. But unlike the Reaver, which is kind of a conical body, very thin, very light, kind of designed for a bit more mobility, these are like a walking battery, or a walking artillery battery. And they have 2 carapace weapons. They have improved protection on their shoulders and back. Their ranged weapons on their hands tend to be even larger than the Reavers. But even they pale in comparison with the sheer size and destruction of the Imperator class. The Imperator stands nigh on midway the size of an Imperial hive spire. They can walk through an Imperial hive, but they have to be careful to not brush buildings on either side of them, and that hive better have a pretty large highway in order to accommodate them. So, their weapons are anti-Titan weapons. We're no longer in the realm of anti-armor. They carry anti-aircraft on their back, and they carry artillery barrages of Reaver caliber on their cathedrals, and they are beyond holy. They are to the point of being sacrosanct to even get damaged. They are kept back in all but the most dangerous circumstances because making another one is unthinkably hard. There are probably tech priests from the Horus Heresy still working on the same freaking Imperator Titan that they were all throughout the Heresy. I'm not even kidding you. There is probably a solid chance that if an Imperator Titan was not under construction during the Heresy with a significant amount of lead time, it is not going to get finished until the modern day. It is thousands of years to make one of these things, and it is incalculable the amount of resources required. And it is why they're called to be never replicable again, even though they can be. It's just the sheer amount of time and resources. The Mechanicus don't see it as possible that the Imperium will be around to need the Imperator again by the time they're done with it. Warhounds and Reavers, a little bit more replicable. They can be done. We can make more of them. Warlords, harder, but not impossible. Imperators are just on the very end side of near impossible, and just, it's almost not worth it. Plenty of planets are still doing it anyway. Plenty of them are working on Imperators, I'm entirely sure, and are trying to make more of them, but the technical and physical limitations and difficulties, I'm sure, are making the job hard. So, famous groups and logistics. So, the Legio system. So this is a system whereby a specific legion is noted as allied or affiliated with a particular Forge World. They maintain it, they take ownership of it, they give orders to it, but they are individual. They do have their own legends and systems and things like that. They have, opinions and minds of their own in the Legion, and they can disagree with the Mechanicus, but generally they come to a cooperative conclusion instead of disagreeing outright and refusing one another, because the Forge World needs the Legio needs the Forge World. They're inextricably linked. So, the Legion system essentially encourages a way to break down different forces. So, you might have one Imperator, if you're lucky, 2 or 3 Warlords, 4 or 5 Reavers, and then a dozen Warhounds. Great. You can literally make 3 different detachments of Titans from that. You would give 1 Imperator and then give it 3 Warhounds. That's one detachment entirely by itself. Then you have one of the Warlords in one of the Warlords in the other. Each of them has a Reaver or 2 supporting them, and then the rest of the Warhounds get split up. You could even be like, okay, we're going to have 3 Reavers in one area, and each of them gets 1 Warhound, and that's another detachment. It could get very small or very large. You could deploy the entire Legio all together. An insane deployment from the Mechanicus, and definitely one that would require serious enemy engagement. Enemy Titan Legion requires Allied Legion, but it can be done. Maintaining a Legio, like I said, it is just time and effort. You can see in this thing, every little piece of armor, every little scratch, every little ding on the paint is going to need fixing. And because Titans get into combats like this, where there's orbital weapons and artillery and all different types of stuff firing at them, yeah, the dings and scratches are going to mount up over time, and any weakness is unacceptable to the Mechanicus, and they need the time, the effort, and the period of supply that they need to get things fixed. Transport and deployment. These are going to be administratum vessels that have been modified by the Mechanicus for deploying Titans. They might be owned by the Mechanicus or part owned by the Mechanicus, where they essentially are like, hey, if we need it, this ship is ours, right? And the administratum goes, okay, yeah, sure, fine, whatever. If you need to put Titans in the ships, and we'll allow you to use the ships, that's okay. Repairing a Titan, reusing a Titan, corrupting a Titan. This more applies to Chaos, along with creating new Titans. Both sides can create new Titans, especially of the lower varieties, but it just takes an insane amount of time and effort and materials to do so. Repairing a Titan, hard, like I said, it's very similar to maintenance, it's just going to be repairing it. Fixing any systems or replacing them, hard to replace them in some cases. You can use Chaos Magic in some cases, but you don't necessarily want to convert the creature itself to Chaos, because that could make it uncontrollable or dangerous or not work in reality anymore. Reusing a Titan is essentially when it's been damaged enough to kill the Princeps, but not to destroy the Titan outright, which, let's be honest, considering how big a lot of these things are, and considering their faces are right out front with a bunch of staff in them. By the way, it's a lot of people who think that there's like 1 or 2 staff. No, these actually have a solid cadre of people inside of them. Even the Warhound will have 4 to 6 different staff members, not including servitors, just in the snout and around the pilot. The Reaver might have up to 10 or 12. The Warlord will absolutely have like 20 or so between its carapace, its main control room, its armed weapon rooms, all that stuff. And then the Imperator, I would argue, has somewhere around 100 to 250-ish. But that's not even including like ground troops. That's just Moderati who are controlling the Titan in addition to the driver. So, corrupting a Titan. That's the last one. Now, you can corrupt a Titan's Princeps, and theoretically the Titan won't obey him anymore, but quite often Titans are very violent. Their machine spirits are always out for blood, and they don't necessarily care all that much against whom they are used. Some of them do. Some of them are very pious, or they like the Mechanicus, or they have some opinion as to that. But it's not impossible. If you corrupt a Princeps, you can corrupt the Titan. Since the Titan and the Princeps are inextricably linked, and killing one may damage or weaken the other, problem, yeah. Especially if a Titan dies, the Princeps gone. Definitely gone. For example, Gearhart, during the same Siege of Urdesh, Legio Invicta, he is in sleep death, essentially. He's in a coma inside of his Warlord, inside of his Imperator Titan, but his Imperator is still working. The Moderati are essentially controlling it for him, and they're just kind of pretending that he's not comatose right now, since he's like the father of the Legion and they all respect him. They're hoping he wakes back up, and by the end of the fight he does, because of course Imperial bias. Just kidding. But yes, the pilot can be more damaged or killed. The machine spirit will remain, but if you kill the Titan or damage the machine spirit enough, the Princeps will die. Whew! That was a quick one. I'm glad I got through it. Lots of weapons and stuff to go through with them. If you wanted me to do another video on that, we'll talk about that during the Armory stuff. So, please note, with this video, the cycle begins. I will post the first vote after tonight's live stream, and we will get right on the ways. I am so proud and happy of you all. We are at 300 subscribers, and I never thought that was going to happen. I genuinely thought that I would just get no attention, and that it would be 20 people for the rest of my life that I spent this out towards. But I want you guys to know I'm not flaring up and flaming away. Even if my life tends to get harder, and I'm going to have a lot of time issues in future, I promise to commit to this. I promise to stick with you guys, and I will keep giving you content until there is no more to give you, and then, God willing, I will find more. I will find more. I will do more. So with that, I wish you all a lovely good night.